Good evening. I'm Teresa Skubik, and this is Forum Daily for Tuesday, January 14th. A new potential candidate has entered the Liberal leadership race. A source close to her campaign says Chrystia Freeland will announce her intention to run for the Liberal Party leadership just before the U.S. presidential inauguration. The former finance minister has long been rumored to be in the running for the job of leader and de facto prime minister. The source says that Ms. Freeland promises to bring in dollar-for-dollar tariffs on U.S. imports to match the cost of the tariffs President-elect Donald Trump imposes on Canada. One of the expected contenders for the race to replace Prime Minister Justin Trudeau sat down last night in New York to talk about Canadian-American relations with a popular American late-night TV host. Mark Carney was a guest of Jon Stewart's on The Daily Show, where the two bantered about Donald Trump's recent trolling of making Canada the 51st state.
What are they making up there of the overtures and sort of trolling to Canada about being a part of the United States?
Well, I mean, the bottom line is not going to happen. The overture. I mean,
because you don't want.
Well,
to be with.
We're proud. We find you very attractive, but we're not moving in with you. It's not you. It's us.
Mr. Carney said Canada needs to prepare for a trade dispute like it did the last time Mr. Trump was in office. And on the topic of whether he might run to lead the Liberal Party, Mr. Carney was coy and labeled himself as an outsider in Canadian politics. But the former Bank of Canada governor suggested a good candidate would have a plan to deal with the challenges in the here and now.
Well, I think in a situation like this, you need change. You need to address the economy. We've got an economic crisis because of what Mr. Trump is about to do or saying he's about to do. But we also have challenges in housing, cost of living.
Did you have the same inflationary pressures that we faced here?
I can debate the absolute level, but we had the same inflationary pressures, Bob.
No, we will debate the absolute level right
well,
here
I don't think
right now.
I think Canadians have been very hard pressed in the last few years.
Right.
Wages have not kept up with inflation. People are falling behind, not getting ahead. Housing's very expensive, and there's this broader concern. Again, exclamation point put on by the Trump tariffs about what the future brings. The world's more divided. It's more dangerous. Mm-hmm. What are we going to do? And truth be told, the government has been not as focused on those issues as it could be. We need to focus on them immediately. That can happen now, and that's what this election is going to be about.
Can I tell you something?
Former BC Premier Christy Clark says a short deadline is the primary reason she's decided to not join the federal Liberal leadership race. In a note to supporters today, Ms. Clark also said that she needs to brush up on her French to be a viable candidate. In addition, Industry Minister François-Philippe Champagne will also pass on the race to replace Justin Trudeau. So far, Ontario MP Chandra Arya and former Montreal MP Frank Baylis are the only two to have officially joined the contest. The federal Liberal leadership race will be monitored by Canada's Elections Intelligence Task Force for signs of foreign interference. The Security and Intelligence Threats to Elections Task Force was set up in 2019 to protect the electoral process from foreign interference and includes representatives from CSIS, the RCMP, Global Affairs Canada, and the Communications Security Establishment Canada. The Liberal Party is taking measures to curb voter fraud in its leadership race by limiting voting to party members who are permanent residents or citizens or have status under the Indian Act. The party chooses its next leader by March 9th. Special counsel Jack Smith said in a new report that his team stood up for the rule of law as it investigated U.S. President-elect Donald Trump's efforts to overturn the results of the 2020 election. Mr. Smith says he stands fully behind his decision to bring criminal charges against Trump and believes that Mr. Trump would have been convicted had he not won the 2024 election. The report, just days before Mr. Trump returns to the White House, focuses fresh attention on his frantic but failed efforts to cling to power in 2020. The Justice Department sent the report to Congress early today after a judge refused to block its release. All right, don't go anywhere. Up next, Carrie Underwood is slated to perform at Donald Trump's inauguration. And Mr. Trump's choice for defense secretary testifies at his Senate confirmation hearing. And Qatar says Israel and Hamas are inching closer to a ceasefire. We'll have these stories and more news from around the world when we return. Don't go anywhere. U.S. President-elect Donald Trump's choice for Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth testified at his Senate confirmation hearing this morning.
And to all the troops and veterans watching and here in the room, Navy SEALs, Green Berets, soldiers, pilots, sailors, Marines, Gold Stars, and more, too many friends to name. Officers, enlisted, black and white, young and old, men and women, all Americans, all warriors. This hearing is for you.
Senators questioned whether the former combat veteran and TV news host is fit to head up the U.S. military. Mr. Hegseth's former experience in the Army National Guard is widely viewed as an asset for the job, but he also brings a jarring record of past statements and actions, divisive views about women in combat roles, and allegations of excessive drinking and sexual assault. His appearance was met by protesters disrupting his opening statement.
In our ranks.
Members of the security force will remove members. Members of the security
8 billion to Israel to slaughter children. That's a recruiting crisis.
Country music's Carrie Underwood is slated to perform at Donald Trump's inauguration ceremony next week. The American Idol singer will sing America the Beautiful just before the president-elect takes the oath of office. The Village People are also performing at one of Mr. Trump's inaugural balls and at a rally he's holding in Washington, D.C. the day before he's sworn in. Key mediation country Qatar says that Israel and Hamas are the closest point that they've been to agreeing on a ceasefire in Gaza. Qatar's foreign ministry spokesperson said on Tuesday that the ongoing negotiations his country is hosting are positive and productive, but he didn't get into details of the sensitive talks. Two officials involved in the talks have also told the AP that Hamas has accepted a draft agreement for a ceasefire and the release of dozens of hostages. However, a spokesperson for Israel's prime minister explained this morning that while progress has been made, Hamas has yet to agree to the deal.
Next, on efforts to secure the release of our hostages, let me share with you some of the details. The negotiations for the return of our hostages are ongoing. Yes, the high-level Israeli delegation is currently in Doha in Qatar to advance a framework for the release of the hostages. 466 days now, cruelly held in Hamas captivity. The Prime Minister gave our negotiating team a broad remit for negotiations. From Israel's perspective, we are doing everything in our power to bring back all 98 hostages, the living and the deceased alike, among them women, children, and the elderly. Yes, there is real and continuous progress in these negotiations. Yes, this too is a sensitive time, and perhaps the less said, the better. And yes, we are moving closer, but it is not concluded yet. Hamas are yet to agree.
Over 60 Canadian frontline firefighters are heading to Los Angeles to join international efforts to battle the raging wildfires that have claimed at least 24 lives and thousands of homes. The BC Ministry of Forests says a team of 22 crew members and a ministry rep left for LA on Monday, in addition to a dozen technical and advanced specialists who got there on the weekend. The Alberta government says it also dispatched 40 wildland firefighters, saying, quote, "Good neighbors are always there for each other."
Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to address the devastating wildfires currently affecting California. Alberta Wildfire has received a request to assist California through the Canadian Interagency Forest Fire Centre. Good neighbors are always there for each other. In 2023, California firefighters bravely supported Alberta in a time of great need, and now Alberta is answering the call and stepping up to support our friends and partners in the United States. As of this morning, on January 13th, 2 wildfire crews, including 40 wildland firefighters and 2 agency representatives, are on their way to California to assist with firefighting efforts. Additionally, Type 1 firefighters, incident command personnel, and qualified support staff are ready to go. Alberta Wildfire is also preparing water bombers, pilots, and contracted night vision helicopters to assist in California if requested. The critical situation in California is a stark reminder of why we're doing the work we're doing here in Alberta to ensure our communities are prepared and reduce the risk of catastrophic wildfires.
All right, stay with us. Up next, an economist says that Donald Trump's claims that the bilateral merchandise trade deficit constitutes a subsidy is entirely false. Stay tuned. Forum Daily will be right back after these messages. An economist says that the U.S. benefits at least as much from trade with Canada as Canada benefits. Jim Stanford at the Center for Future Work says that claims made by Donald Trump that the bilateral merchandise trade deficit constitutes a subsidy are false. Mr. Stanford says that Canada is the world's largest market for U.S. exports and that the United States also enjoys a large surplus in services trade with Canada. He joined us this morning for more on Donald Trump's subsidy claim.
Well, there's two big problems with Mr. Trump's argument. First, he's making up numbers about how big the so-called trade deficit is. Now, Canada and the U.S., first of all, have a huge amount of trade that goes both ways, about $1 trillion a year in total. And there is an advantage in that Canada sells a bit more in America than America sells in Canada. So that's a trade surplus bilaterally for Canada and a trade deficit for the U.S. In 2023, that imbalance was about $40 billion U.S., so a very small share of the $1 trillion two-way flow. But Mr. Trump has been just throwing numbers out, calling it a $200 billion deficit. So his numbers are invented, basically. Part of that is because he's excluding trade in services. He's only focusing on merchandise trade, tangible products that come in, whether it's by pipeline or truck or container ship. And he ignores services trade, which is a very large and rapidly growing part of international trade. And by the way, the area where the U.S. has the strongest advantage. So it's cherry picking for him to only look at merchandise, exclude services. But even then, his numbers aren't supported. So first of all, the deficit isn't as big as he says. Secondly, the bilateral trade deficit in no way can be considered a subsidy. In essence, the U.S. is consuming more than they produce. That's what a trade deficit means in aggregate. And America has had a trade deficit every year for the last 50 years. This isn't new, and it isn't even big. It's actually shrunk in recent years, and it certainly can't be considered an emergency. And if anything, the rest of the world is subsidizing America through capital inflows in order to allow America to keep consuming more than they produce. And Canada does that too. We lend lots of money to America, yet despite that, we pay net interest and profit income to America. So it's a very strange situation, and in no way is this a charity case where America is bailing out Canada. If anything, we are subsidizing the Americans. In America's case, Canada is their biggest export market. They sell more goods and services in Canada than any other country, far more than China or Mexico or Europe. So all those companies that sell about, close to $500 billion a year in Canada are going to lose business. That's one problem. Secondly, most of what America buys from Canada is not finished products, consumer goods that you see on the shelves, at Walmart or wherever. They are inputs or raw materials or supplies or industrial products that are then used by U.S. businesses in their own production. And so if you put a tariff on or you block off the trade, those U.S. businesses won't have those inputs anymore. So you're actually hurting American businesses. That's how it's quite different than putting a tariff on something that comes from China, where it's more likely to be a finished product. There you could say, okay, you're creating some space for the American firms to move into that market. In Canada's case, all you're doing is penalizing the American firms that use our stuff. So there's no doubt that America in aggregate would be hurt as much as Canada, possibly more, because of the strategic importance of what they buy from us. Oil, for example, Canada is the largest supplier. We supply over half of America's oil imports. But remember, the U.S. is much bigger than Canada, 9 times the population and roughly 10 times the size economically. So that equal amount of pain divided across a larger country won't be felt as severely as it would be in Canada. So both sides would be hurt. But in Canada, proportionately, because we are so dependent on exports, and particularly exports to the U.S., we would feel the pain more than the Americans would in aggregate.
And this morning, when asked about the economic impact of Donald Trump's proposed tariffs, Ontario Premier Doug Ford outlined the potential impact.
But I was getting numbers yesterday from the ministries. It could cost 500,000 jobs. This is serious. It's unprecedented. And let's hope it doesn't cost 500,000 jobs. But we need the ability to go in there and support the sectors and the people to make sure we protect Ontario and return Canadian jobs as well right across our country.
All right, stay tuned. Up next, Canada settles a class action lawsuit with armed forces members who experienced racism while in uniform. We'll be right back. Canada has settled a class action lawsuit with armed forces members who experienced racism while in uniform. Payments will range from $5,000 to $35,000. The claimants are people who served in the military between April 1985 and January 10th. The settlement also includes a pledge to make systemic changes to the armed forces culture. Ottawa is pausing an incentive program offering rebates of up to $5,000 when buying or leasing electric vehicles. Transport Canada says more than 500,000 zero-emission vehicles have been sold or leased with incentives through the program since 2019. In 2023, zero-emissions vehicles accounted for 11.7% of Canada's auto market, up from 3.1% in 2019. Representatives from the auto industry were in Ottawa this morning expressing their concern with the pause.
It should be obvious to everyone now that provincial and federally mandated zero-emission vehicle sales targets are no longer ambitious, but a complete fantasy. There is no pathway to 100% zero-emission vehicle sales in the next 10 years with the supports being provided to Canadians. Dictating what vehicles Canadians can and can't buy without providing them with the supports necessary to switch to electric is a made-in-Canada policy failure. Today, we are calling on provincial and federal governments to scrap the mandates. Thank you.
The Quebec measles outbreak has grown to 11 cases. The province's health department says that thousands of people might have been exposed to the highly contagious disease at a shopping mall north of Montreal this month. It has listed dozens of potential exposure sites in Montreal and in suburbs to the north and south of the city. People who are vaccinated or otherwise protected are unlikely to get measles, but all of those who have been exposed are being asked to monitor for symptoms that include a fever, runny nose, and a cough. A new global ranking raises doubts about Canada's reputation of being open to other countries. While Singapore kept its status as the country with the world's most powerful passport, Canada was considered among the top 5 losers in the 2025 Henley Passport Index. Canada sat at 7th among 199 passports in the index. We were joined earlier by Basil Moore-Elzeki, Managing Director and Head of Americas at Henley and Partners, to discuss Canada's ranking on the Passport Index.
So the global passport ranking was in place for the last 18 years, pioneered by Henley and Partners using data from AIDA. Now, the ranking is quite simplistic in the sense that it ranks all the visa-free travel that is possible per passport. But visa-free travel is also used as an indicator of how many government relationships governments have, and sort of in terms of bilateral agreements, diplomatic ties. So it's a good indicator to see how the country's doing. I would never call Canada a loser, as I'm Canadian myself. However, they did lose on the ranking. So it's important to specify that even though they lost in the ranking, that did not mean that they did not gain visa-free travel in the last 10 years since 2015. So they actually went up 18 visa-free countries. They added 18 countries to their visa-free travel on the passport in the last 10 years. However, other countries have been much more, I would say, proactive, looking for more economic tourism, and thus have added much more to their passports. As an example, if you look at the UAE, in the last 10 years, they gained 32, to give you a comparison. Or if you look at Kosovo, they gained 40 in their visa-free travel for their passport. So as you can see, Canada did gain, it's just that they did not gain as fast, which contributed to the drop. Now, in terms of the specific countries from 2024 to 2025 that they have lost in visa-free travel was just due to the digitalization of the industry, where now there's something called e-visas that are being applied for in order to get access to visas. So the two countries are Togo and Gabon. Those were the two countries that were lost. However, others were gained, such as Brazil and Egypt were gained on the visa-free travel list for Canada. So it ranks 7th. It maintained its spot from last year. However, things can change going forward in terms of the ranking if other countries are a bit more proactive in adding visa-free travel to their passports. Canada's standing on a global stage is very well. So being on the top 10 is quite impressive. Now, if you're looking at Singapore and Japan, they have always been on the top 1, 2, or 3. Now, if you look at European countries such as France, Germany, Spain, they typically were second and they dropped to third. But this is, if you actually look at the passport index, this is from one visa-free travel to another. So they're kind of rallying to the top. So I would say Canada's place is really good. But what we would like to see is more visa-free travel being added to the passport to match the other countries that are proactive in that sense. So I would say Canada's an excellent standing, well-respected passport to travel with. It provides access to the world. It's just a question of preserving that access and increasing it.
I'm Teresa Skubik, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Good night, Canada.